My name is Gwendolyn Alker, and I'm Director of the Theater Studies program in the Tisch Drama Department here at NYU.
I'm Ari Fliakos, performing with the Wooster group. Performed most recently in a pink chair in place of a fake antique at Skirball Center.
I'm Erin Mullin. I'm a performer and the stage manager of the Wooster group.
So thanks to both of you for being here. It's a joy to spend some time with you. The event, as Ari mentioned, that brings us here is I have a nice visual cue of the program, which is the Wooster group's performance of A Pink Chair, which happened recently here at Skirball. And so I want to start talking a little bit about this show. In particular, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that all of the Wooster group's performances work deeply with some particular source material, right, that you do deep research on. You bring in some intertext, and then you put that research and those ideas onto your voices and your bodies. So I was interested how we got to this particular source material, which my understanding is the work of Tadeusz Kantor. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is I'm not an actor, and my pronunciation probably sucks, so I like you as the actors in the room to say Kantor's name correctly and with more grace than I just did.
Well, I hope we can. I mean, we have struggled.
How's your Polish?
We have struggled with it, and we've gotten better.
Okay, good.
As someone who has trained extensively in phonetic Polish, my Polish is terrible.
Okay, well, give it a
But
try.
I'm going to go with that. I'm going to do the Kantor because I think that's the one I'm confident in.
Mhm.
Okay,
Tadeusz Kantor.
I don't think that's right.
Great.
Ari.
Really?
How would you say it?
Well, the way that Dorota
Tadeusz.
Korkowska, who's Kantor's daughter,
Right.
says it, I will approximate as close as I can. She says Tadeusz Kantor.
Okay, great. So we're going to go with that pronunciation? I'll just say Kantor.
She's always right.
Kantor.
I'll say
Yeah.
Kantor. That'll be easier. But if you say the first name again, you can say that again. I will not. But you did a deep dive into Kantor's work. He's a well-known Polish avant-garde director, auteur, interdisciplinary artist. And I was interested, first of all, to ask why Kantor and why now? Why was it that you came to this source material at this time?
It came about through a grant from the Adam. Now I'm going to not pronounce
That's the one,
this.
that's the one I didn't want to do.
That's right.
I'm going to butcher this.
No worries.
Mikhevich Institute.
Uh-huh.
Something in that ballpark.
Yeah.
They gave the Wooster group a grant to explore Kantor's material and make a piece based on his archive and his work. So it really came about very pragmatically from money.
Gotcha.
Was there.
But it was very vague, like, please do a piece about that. Tadeusz Kantor.
So, and this group is affiliated with Polish government, or is it?
I believe
Believe that
so,
they are.
but I'm not sure.
I asked that, which, is perhaps a question for later, but my understanding was that when Kantor was alive, he was in some ways getting less kind of publicity to the West than the other well-known Polish director, Grotowski, who I know Ari has worked with, which we can talk about that in a moment. But it seems like perhaps there's now a revisitation of the impact of his work in Poland and trying to distribute that beyond through the work of the Wooster group. So in terms of working with Kantor, how is this material useful for you, either in comparison to the other source material that you work with, or just on its own? Like, what did you mine from it that you found to be useful for you as a group?
Well, it's kind of an unusual piece. We do this sometimes, but we didn't have a script, or it was this vague sort of directive to do something about Kantor, right? I mean, it was very vague. So for when that happens, it's really that the task becomes finding something that interests us, and most importantly, Liz, so that she can find an into him and his work, or something that interests him and interests her and excites us. So that was the struggle, is to find out what it was going to be.
Yeah.
And so we do what we normally do in that case, which is we immerse ourselves in material. And there was material, and that's video footage, documentaries about him, readings from his books.
He was a prolific writer, so there was a lot of
And you had
text.
access to that archival material?
A lot of it is, some of it is published.
Okay.
But a lot of, so there was this interest, so Dorota Korkowska, who's his daughter, did I pronounce that right?
I think so,
We can try
Turns
again.
out she owned the rights to his
Oh, great.
image. Is
Oh.
that correct? There's some very specific things she had the rights to.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to send a Polish, our resident filmmaker at the time, Zbigniew Zimek, is Polish, and of course knew more about Cantor than any of us did. And he made a couple of trips to Poland and met with her, and they were able to access this archival footage, she and Cantor's daughter.
And Liz Lecomte, our director, went on one of these research trips to Poland as well. And you know, they took a camera and they just filmed everything that they could. So we also had that to go off of.
Right.
But
And
luckily,
that's the footage that's in the piece, right? That's
Well,
Kate Falk and other folks?
it
or
gets
that's
a little
different?
complicated and layered, because I think the footage that you actually see in the piece is us watching that footage of, or us channeling that footage from some of those
You see the
research
TV
periods.
in a reflection in a mirror,
Okay.
and then you see us watching that. You know, it's very.
But we're kind of we were recreating at the garage some of those conversations that they had earlier had.
Which we had recorded, and they were listening to. So there's a lot of it became a kind of a documentary quest. Like it was, we just accumulated footage not only of his work and him, but then of course of us engaging with the house that he lived in. That they went and recorded footage of, with Liz going in and meeting some of the performers that he worked with. And so accumulating all this material that we know that at some point we might have to access and use, because eventually, in some way, we go out on a limb here, almost every piece we make in some way becomes about the making of the piece you're watching.
For sure. Yeah.
So we sort of know that, and so we accumulate this material, and then in the end, if nothing else, we have our attempt to engage with the subject.
Right. As material.
As material.
Yeah. Process as product.
Yeah, and a large part of our process is that we record all of our rehearsals, and sometimes we'll do special setups so that we can actually use the footage in the show, but we record every rehearsal, so we can always, if something happens in rehearsal, we can go back and be like, that conversation that we had with Dorota was really interesting, let's take that off the tape and transcribe it, and then, or maybe we put the tape in actors' ears and the actors recreate that conversation that happened a few weeks before.
Yes.
So
when you're talking about this process, that calls to mind just kind of a larger technique that I think the Wooster Group is known for, right? Where you're putting the video feed, generally with no sound, in conversation with the live bodies on stage, right? In this particular piece, which was in 5 parts, yes, I found that the third part was that, if memory serves, that was the moment where you guys started to act out a video feed of a piece of Cantor's, which I'm not going to remember the name, so I'm going to look it up.
I Shall Never Return.
I Shall Never Return, thank you, from 1988. So I'm just curious, because this would be the question I would ask you if I had access to you, and now I do. What is the desired outcome, or perhaps why are you interested in putting these archival remnants onto your bodies? And what do you feel as theater artists that does that's different than perhaps just showing the video or disappearing the video for your audience and showing your live bodies acting that same thing? And I'm sure people ask you this all the time, but that's for me still a really interesting question about
Right.
your work.
I mean, it's interesting because what you're describing is a result that we don't really experience as performers on stage, and even in the making of it, that's not something that we're quite self-conscious about. But I can tell you that from a purely pragmatic perspective, what we're doing with that piece of material in particular, and in other pieces in different ways, but with similar impulses, Hamlet, the Grotowski piece. What we're doing is engaging in a relic. We're engaging with a relic. Where we have a dialogue with, and I don't say this in a fluffy way. It's it is kind of literal in the way we use it. A dialogue with that material as a way of having a dialogue with the artist and the artists who were in the piece, and so for us it's not there's nothing, it's not a visual element, although it very much is for Liz, I think, and for you. For us, it's more of like something that we have a relationship with. It anchors us to something very specific, and eventually, when the piece is flying, meaningful, that can actually, it's almost like a seance. I mean, it's kind of a seance.
Yeah. And it also makes sense in that I feel you folks are virtuosic enough with your acting that at some level you don't have to look at the video much of the time. That's my assumption. Correct me if I'm wrong. But you keep checking back in with it, which I always find somewhat entertaining in a way, because you always check yourself against the video, which makes sense.
You're
If
talking
seeing
specifically about that
conversation.
big monitor in the middle.
Yeah, or your own monitors, my sense, in front of you.
Right, well, we
Right,
have,
you have monitors.
we have
A lot of
we have like
So
a
you have a lot
sports
of
bar.
monitors, right, in
More
front of
TVs
you.
than a
So
sports
you're,
bar.
maybe that just catches your eye, right? Video always catches your eye. But it's very clear in the audience that the actors are watching the video.
Well, that's an
right?
important.
In pretty much all Wooster Group productions that I've seen.
Right.
And I don't actually think, and again, maybe I'm wrong, you are trained actors, you could memorize the choreography and the lines, so you don't necessarily need to look at them, but you seem to be choosing to look at them. And maybe that's a directorial cue, or maybe that's a choice.
I mean, so it seems like two separate things to me. The audience having the visual reference
Yes.
of the source material
Right.
on stage to look at and go back and forth between,
Yeah.
and then us watching the source material.
Yeah.
Which and
The
it's
latter is what I'm talking about.
Right.
And that actually interests
Right.
me too. Yeah.
And I think what we found, or what I found, is that when you're watching the tape, there's a kind of specificity that you just lose immediately as soon as the source goes away. And you know, even someone with a great physical memory like Ari, you just can't quite get all of the little tiny things, the breaths and the movements and the things without being connected and hooked into that source material.
So then you're trying to be accurate, is what you're saying.
I
And
think it's-
you're also having the conversation. That's two different responses.
I think it's more about being about being open and taking cues when they come,
Yeah,
and not
like a
not
mindfulness
thinking-
exercise.
kind of, yeah, and not thinking like, oh, this is when I have to do the thing. You're doing the thing because you see the thing. So maybe there's some kind of almost distancing thing that happens because it's not psychological.
Yeah.
Well, also, I mean, I've always thought about this as I've been through Liz's work, and also having an acting background, and actually studying Meisner, and having read like Stanislavski.
Yeah.
It's sometimes I'm struck by how Liz has managed to what she's interested in is fundamental to like what all those masters were interested in, which is seeing a performer be present on stage.
Yeah.
And so like when Stanislavski talks about actions and when Meisner's talking about like the task of repetition as a way of like doing something so specific and task oriented as like repeating what you hear, it's sort of like what Liz has, this technique has developed us into, what it results in is more presence. It's sort of an attempt to make performers present. So what we're doing all the time is real. We're really engaging with the television. We're really, you know, our bandwidth is so consumed, or, I mean, the beauty of it is it's not so consumed by the time a piece has arrived, that we're actually like, it becomes subtext in a way that's actually kind of beautiful as a performer, that you can engage so specifically in a task and still be active and have the bandwidth to be present and deal with your performers on stage, say the lines that you're not hearing, and, you know, so she sort of comes at it in a different way, but ultimately it makes us as a purely as a performative tool, it makes us present.
Perhaps get to the same goal.
In a way, but all that's to say that the tasks themselves are serving specific purposes, and so the task in this case, and you might have noticed it more in this case, us looking at the X monitor, it's something that we've developed as more of a thing in this piece, that we are more aware on stage of this relic that you're watching, and of our relationship to it, and of our differences with it. Whereas in Hamlet, it was more about how close can we get?
Accuracy.
Accuracy, like real, like real rigorous, and that this thing behind us is something for you,
Yeah.
but for us it's really about inhabiting the performances that we were.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here sorry, but
That's okay.
here I think Liz was, and the performers were doing this sort of curating, taking from the source material.
Yeah.
We weren't doing everything that we saw those performers in I Shall Never Return do.
Mm.
Because Liz wanted to make clear that we were not trying to be those performers, because she knew and we knew that we could not be those performers because
Right.
we don't have their training. We're coming from a very different place.
Right.
So she wanted us to be a kind of different version in conversation with what they were doing, and to give pride of place to Contour's work and his actors so that the audience could see the relic.
Right.
Right.
It also, when you use the word relic, that kind of brings to me the content of this particular piece. That it seemed to be very much a meditation about loss, right? About archiving that which is no more, right? That we do have these fragments, but ultimately we've lost the live work. And what really struck me about this piece was it being about the relationship between a daughter and her father, who she's lost, who she will never see again, right? And this kind of fraught moment of, someone who's also lost her father. You want that person back so fully, and when there's someone in the public domain, which my father was also someone in the public domain, you can get them back for these brief flashes through recordings of their voice or their body, in the case of the footage you folks were working with. And that kind of trying to recover that emotional presentness, which you also know is not there, right? So I really enjoyed that about this piece.
Well, just to circle back to your original question, that was Liz's way in,
Yeah.
ultimately, was spending time with Dorota, and because Liz was never finding that connection to Cantor himself, as similar as they are in certain ways.
Yeah.
She was never, so for her, that personal connection with the
Yeah.
daughter, that was really, suddenly it was like, then we were in.
And when did you meet the daughter?
Early on in the process.
Yeah.
And she was with us for a lot of the making of the
Okay.
piece.
Has she seen the full product?
Oh yeah,
She
she's
comes to every run.
She's
Oh,
the
great.
dramaturg, and
Oh,
she's
great.
been at every tour stop, every run.
And she has notes for us,
Nice.
and they're always great.
They're very
Yeah.
they're very specific.
As a fellow dramaturg, I appreciate that.
No, and she gives Liz notes, and Liz trusts her, and
That's
it's
great.
kind of a
They have a really beautiful
beautiful
relationship,
relationship.
actually. Yeah.
That's great. Well, 3 cheers for the dramaturg. But so I actually want to go back to the acting, and I'm also going to do another self-serving question, which is that I have brought my Intro to Theater Studies class to see the Wooster probably on numerous occasions. And these are first-year students in the Department of Drama. They're just being exposed to different acting techniques, including Meisner, Adler, Strasberg, etc. They're always a little, shall we say, confused, befuddled when they see you folks. And I think the last time we went, and I don't remember which play it was, apologies, but we had just read Aristotle, and we were thinking about questions of mimesis, right? So this brings up this larger question of acting as repetition or as imitation. And I think what confuses them the most is that they're in many ways taught in the Stanislavski tradition to disappear themselves into the role. And you guys in some ways don't disappear yourselves into the role. There is that kind of push and play of distance from the characters that you inhabit, and also switching, right, between characters and yourselves or other characters in the piece. So what would you say to a first-year acting student in terms of this acting style? Do you think it does build on these other techniques, or do you see it as just a fundamentally different lineage?
It's very tricky because each piece we make, there's a sort of a new performative language that we develop. So there isn't one general thing.
Okay.
But I think that I would say, because I think it's different for everyone, but for me, it's been very instructive because I don't think you can fully disappear. And I don't think it serves a performer to fully disappear because you're losing then the richness of the impossible thing to recreate, which is the richness of a person.
Yeah.
And if you can just build on that or put that person in different circumstances doing different things, then you have a character. You know? And I say that even as someone who enjoys playing with very fully developed masks,
Yeah.
which even if a mask is very fully developed, you still are, that's a way of making you more present, not of hiding, because I strongly believe that as a thing, that disappearing is not really going to serve anybody.
Yeah.
But I think you can seem like you're gone.
Yeah.
If you're fully present.
Yeah.
Doing very specific things that you might otherwise not be doing.
Yeah.
Like in this piece, what we do, or the way we talk, or how we pitch our voices, or. Does that answer?
Sure, and I want to put Erin on the spot to say, you know, I know, and perhaps our audience does not know, that you attended NYU Drama, and you were an actor in the experimental theater wing.
In fact, you auditioned to me.
I auditioned for her, which I actually didn't remember, but she looked slightly familiar,
It was a long time
so
ago.
there it is. But I want to know about that transition for you, right? So you had training at the experimental theater wing, doing physical-based acting. I would say that that's the least connected to the Stanislavski tradition of the various modalities that we offer in drama. So I want to know how that transition was for you. I also don't know whether you had a lot of other acting gigs before you ended up with the Wooster group, but what was that shift in your own acting style like for you?
Well, I'm going to try to answer your previous question in answering this one. Because what I was going to say was that early on in my time at NYU, I don't remember, it was either as a first-year student or a second-year student, I went to see a Wooster group show, Vieux-Carré, at Baryshnikov Arts Center. I had never seen the group's work before, and I was in the experimental theater wing, so I was, you know, I was beginning to understand a little more of that world, but didn't have any relationship to it before, growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, doing musicals basically, not well. And seeing that show was a real point of departure for me, because I was already at that point growing kind of dissatisfied with acting. I didn't really, the Stanislavski approach, it didn't appeal to something in me. I didn't want to do it. You know, it didn't bring up any desire in me. So to see the Wooster group performers, and I think in that show there was a strong element of mask. The characters, they all had, you know, very specific accents and physicalities and costumes, and I was able to access Tennessee Williams's world and his work through the distance that I felt watching that production. I didn't get hung up on, oh, they're trying to play these parts and do all the emotions and show us how to feel. It was there laid out for me. So after that, it took me a while, but I eventually got an internship with the Wooster group. And simultaneously, I was deciding that I didn't want to be an actor. So I got a technical internship with the Wooster group and started, you know, learning how to make things and do things. And I really thought that my acting career was over. And then I wasn't acting at all. I was
You
working,
stage manage a lot of
I was doing some stage management, I was working in a props department, I was doing a little bit of sound, and then in 2015, when the former stage manager left, I went back to work with the group as a stage manager. And for a while I was just doing that, and also running video, because as you mentioned, we use video in all of the pieces, and in some of them I run the video from on stage, so that was kind of how I got back on stage. You know, off to the side running video. And then just the way Liz works and the way the room works is, if something needs to happen or if there's a character who's missing, Liz will be like, oh, can you do that part? Or an intern, can you come down and read this part? Oh, Erin's sitting on stage, can she fill in this part? So I started acting again, I guess, in that capacity.
Yes, let's sit with that for a moment, because I actually found it fascinating that in the credits for this piece you were both listed as an actor and as the production stage manager. I will say personally that usually the personality of an actor and the personality of a stage manager could not be more diametrically opposed when you're in a theater room working on a show, right? So I found that somewhat entertaining, but it was also kind of a true indication of how the Wooster Group works.
But also, I'm going to add here, the stage manager doesn't quite do what she does justice.
Okay.
Because that's
Or
not.
it's just a different. It's just
not
a different
traditional-
role.
it's
I
not
don't.
traditional.
I don't
So how
think
is it
I
different?
could.
And how
I
is it
don't think I could do what traditional stage managers do, and that's not really my personality type.
So how is it different in the Wooster Group
Well,
context?
you'd be in a better position to say, but stage managers that I've worked with in traditional theater, sort of hang back, sort of loosely run rehearsals, but it's the director who's, and then when it comes to when the run of the show comes, right, the stage manager is calling cues essentially and maybe giving notes sometimes. That's not at all what happens here.
Okay.
I mean, it is to some extent, but I'll give my broad strokes and then you can fill in. But this changes because one thing that Liz is very sensitive to is the personalities of who's in the room and what they're good at, and so what Erin does is very different in some ways than what her predecessor did.
Right.
It's a lot of what she's extremely nimble with technology and cueing, and so she's essentially like part video person, a video operator. We're never sure who's actually running the video. If it's Erin, it usually turns out to be Erin. So she's sort of like, she sort of runs rehearsal, and more so than I feel like the stage managers that I've worked with in traditional rehearsal. And she's got a computer where she's on the script and has a video system where she's cueing, and that all I mean, we rehearse things for a really long time, so that develops over many months and even years, the material she's using, how she's using it, in terms of the technology that maybe you could go from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of non-traditional or idiosyncratic way that we work is that, we have the source material and we can't rehearse without the video oftentimes. So, in I Shall Never Return, most of the source material is this archival recording of I Shall Never Return. So basically, I have a system that allows me to VJ that. So I have the video, and we can futz with it and change the speed or change the way that it's cued. But because I have the closest relationship with that video, I have to run rehearsals so that I can say, oh, we're going from this frame where he takes his hat off, So, and because I'm on stage and am in this piece performing insane lines and stuff, it makes it a little more fluid than like an actor, stage manager dynamic.
Yeah.
It's very much like I'm just the one who has the button and gets to say where we're going from and when we start.
Okay, great.
But in A Pink Chair, she's on stage being that person and literally running the show.
Yeah, but it's set.
And firing video cues.
You're not doing it improvisational. At some point,
Oh no, it's set. It's set. Yeah.
It's set, but there is. It's funny. I realized when my computer was having some difficulties. It was being really slow and laggy, and I realized what a difference it makes with the cues when the timing is just a little bit off.
Yes.
Or when the performer hits the table too hard.
Yeah, there was one performance where Ari smacked the table, and he hit it so hard that it jumped triggered my controller to jump to the next cue.
And this was in a live performance?
Yeah.
But it worked out brilliantly, and Liz, of course, wanted us to
how can we recreate that? Yeah.
But I mean, that's a really good example of how, the more accidents really work, and often technical difficulties work. I mean, one thing we're not shy about is the person running the video is on stage, and you see all the chords, and the technology is always very transparent.
Yeah.
And even though we use these tiny microphones, we often use big microphones that are not the latest and the greatest. It's sort of like a transparent use of theatrical materials.
We don't hide our body packs.
For
or
sure.
it's
No,
like-
you're always revealing your technology.
Yeah.
But part of that is also because we're not hiding the fact that we are performers and we are artists engaging in this thing with you.
Yeah.
And I'm Ari and this is Erin. I mean, ultimately that's what we get to.
Again,
right?
it goes back to the disappearing thing. We're not trying to disappear
Yeah.
ourselves into the character. We're trying to show Ari and a character.
Right.
Yeah.
Or show
In
Ari
conversation
being the
with each other.
innkeeper.
Yeah.
The conversation. Yeah.
And
it's
show
like dialogue.
me being the person running the computer and also being this character.
Right. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about this larger process of the group in a room, right? I could call what you do devising. That is a term that is now a popular term.
Yeah.
But you guys, as a company, have been doing it for over 4 decades now. So you could say that you kind of set the bar on what devising is. But it's certainly not a situation where you have a pre-existing text and people are running in their own lanes and they stay in their lanes, like the dramaturg, the director, the actor. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about how the product differs because of this kind of devising mentality of everybody kind of moving through more as an individual than as a role. And how do you think that affects the final project, and how might that be useful for people who are new to devising or are interested in what are the lessons that the Wooster Group has for people who are interested in moving into a more devising world?
Well, I think one thing that is important to our process is that we have all of the technicians and everyone in the room from the very beginning, from the research stage on. And as Ari alluded to, we have oftentimes a pretty long process. I mean, ideally we have a long process. Sometimes we have to make things fast, and that's what ends up happening. But
Fast is like
fast,
A year.
Fast for us is like
just
a year,
slow
and
for
working,
everybody else on like
and
a
working every
6-week
day.
cycle, yeah.
And you know, we're very fortunate to have a full-time
Yeah.
company of people that, so we're able to rehearse. Right now it's 6 hours a day,
Yeah.
5 days a
It's
week.
very luxurious.
In our own
especially
space.
In our own
yeah.
space.
Mm.
So, but throughout all that time, you know, we have a lighting person, we have a video artist, we have a sound artist, we kind of all function, I think, as dramaturgs. Some people do more of the heavy lifting than others, but we're all, the technicians and everyone are involved in the research phase.
Right. You don't have like a tech week where it all comes together. It's
I
already
like to
integrated,
say,
it
I like
sounds
to say that for us, it's like every rehearsal is
it's
tech.
tech, yeah.
even lights is around.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you know, we rehearse in our costumes
Mm.
as they develop. For a pink chair, we had our costumes long before we knew what we were going to be doing in them.
Mm.
There were months where we would, you know, get all dressed up in our costumes and then like sit around at a table.
Right, because once we spotted the relic, then we knew that there was so much material there to mine, but we still didn't know what our relationship to it was or what the story was going to be, our story with it.
So of course, not everyone has the luxury of such a long process and having everyone in the room all the time. But the advice that I would give is to say, you know, be really curious and use the people around you, and don't come in with a set idea.
Mm.
I think that's very central to Liz's process. I'm going to go on a limb and say that's central
Yeah.
to Liz's process, that we don't know where we're going when we start.
And also sometimes you'll perform a show and then you'll go back to something else and you come back to the show a few years later,
Yeah.
restage it. And I'm assuming then it would shift because it's still
Sure.
a process, right?
And people change.
Yeah.
And you know, Liz is a genius at using the people that are in the room with her.
Mhm.
So I'd say use the people that are around you and see what their associations
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is, don't be seduced by something great you made.
Mm.
Like one thing that I'm always so impressed by is that we'll make something beautiful and work on it for a really long time, and then it just won't work.
Mm.
What?
Oh, in a rehearsal, like a moment.
A moment, yeah. We worked on that for like
Yeah.
sometimes even a show. It'll be in the show for a couple of weeks or whatever, and then she'll be like,
Uh-huh.
doesn't
Not
work.
to be too precious with the
Don't be too,
material.
right, and it's
let it
gorgeous.
go.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
gorgeous, and it's like it's fun to look at, and it's even entertaining.
Yeah.
But we're dealing with that now with the mother. We're working on Brecht's The Mother, and you know, we have this guy working with us who's really fluent with magic. He's worked with us for years, and he's doing this thing that's extremely entertaining in the scene. It's like almost too entertaining. It's not. We can't hear what the. It's sort of like crippling the story slightly in that moment. We have to like ease back on entertaining. So in other words, like don't be too attached to something that you think might work or worked before. Be ready to totally scrap it.
Yeah.
In the interest of like making something that, for lack of a better word, works.
And the story you think is preeminent at that moment.
Right. I mean, story is such a specific. Yes, I think ultimately we're telling stories. So yes, I think that will work.
Okay.
But maybe not story. Maybe not narrative in the way that we're used to. Right?
I gotcha. And tell me about this new piece you're working on. When is that going up?
It's Bertolt Brecht's The Mother, not Mother Courage.
I know.
but
Is
The
that what
Mother.
happened to the courage?
Yes.
Is she less courageous?
She's very
Oh.
courageous.
She's still courageous.
Yes, I mean she has a real arc. She starts off. It's about a woman, an older woman whose son gets involved in a revolutionary workers' movement. And Brecht wrote it in 1931 in Germany, but it's about, ostensibly, it's based on Maxim Gorky's novel of the same name. So they're Russian workers. She, in trying to save her son, gets involved in the revolutionary movement and becomes a revolutionary in her own right, and by the end she's kind of transformed. And the play has 13 songs in it. We're working with a great composer, Amir El-Safar.
It's almost a musical.
I'd say it. It's a play with songs.
Okay.
But we've
You go back
A
to
learning play with songs.
Yes,
your early desire to do musicals.
Yes. Everything comes back around.
Comes in handy.
Yes. It's
Oh, she can sing too. Perfect.
It's a Lehrstück. It's
A
definitely
learning play.
a learning play.
Yeah.
So it's very didactic. It's meant to teach people about communism.
Yeah.
So we'll do that. We're working on that right now, and we'll do that in June in Vienna.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I think I'll do one more question, if that's okay. I'm going to come back to Ari just again. This is trying to connect a pink chair to some of your earlier work. But I mentioned this at the beginning of the interview, so I want to come back to this. But you also were in Poor Theater back in, 2004?
Something like that. Yeah.
Which you won an Obie. Well done.
Thank you.
Back in the day. I think that was the first one.
And I received it at Skirball.
Oh, did you?
The last time I would, yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I think that was the first time that I saw you perform.
Okay.
So it was just interesting for me that you were, having this relationship with a Polish theater director.
Yeah.
And now you've circled all the way back around to
Yeah.
having a relationship with a Polish theater director.
Yeah. And I have Polish.
They're kind of the two.
Yeah.
Right? So was there a bit of a resonance with those two pieces against each other, or do you see them as very different?
Very different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, in both cases, there was this relic that we had a relationship to. In the case of the Grotowski, it was Acropolis. In that piece, I had a real identification with the performer that I was had a relationship with. I had an identification with that piece.
And who was that performer?
Zygmunt Malik. That was something. And I feel like Liz had Liz chose Grotowski, and she chose William Forsythe. And I'll never forget it, actually, when she had the moment where she knew she was going to do it. That piece was when she was reading in the New York Times. We had this little film hut set up called the Honeycomb Hideout, where we were making some video thing. And she read this, like an obit on William Forsythe in the Times. Basically, it wasn't an obit, I mean, he's very much alive, but that postmodernism, once he was announced he was leaving the Frankfurt Ballet, postmodernism, she said at that moment, is dead. William Forsythe is leaving the Frankfurt Ballet. Postmodernism's dead. I see it right now. We're going to do a piece for Billy. And she got up and started dancing. And she said, "You're gonna do this." She started dancing like William Forsythe, and it was very entertaining at least. And then soon after that, it was like she also wanted to. So it's a different piece also because of her impulse to do it was so.
Yeah.
I have never seen her do that, actually, since. you know, so
And was that
it
your
was so
first time
personal.
working with a company, or you had worked with them before?
No, I'd worked with them before. So we had done
Okay.
I'd done House Lights, which
Okay.
we got.
Yeah.
That was a
The House Lights
commission.
before that, I think of that being after for them. Since
It was the anniversary of Gertrude Stein,
see,
and
yeah.
so we got money to do that. That was similar to Pink Chair, where we basically constructed the script
Yes.
using her materials. Then I filled in for a small part, so it was Into You the Birdie,
Yeah.
which was a script,
Yes.
you know, more of a play than in terms of what we started out with, but also was something that a friend of the company's had written, and you know, the impulse for that also was not. It took a long time to wrangle that one,
Yeah.
and then was just like, we're doing this.
Yeah.
And then it took forever to make it because we had to really learn the improvisational techniques of Forsyth,
Right.
and we had to really study Grotowski, and not only study Grotowski, but study with a Polish performer, Zenon Kuszelnicki, and he would train us on phonetic Polish. So we weren't learning Polish, but we were learning how to say it perfectly.
Right.
And so I also enjoyed that as like an athlete, someone
Yeah.
who loves to like learn something almost physical and perfect it.
Yeah.
That really appealed to me in that way too, and I had emotional connection to. It was such an emotionally invested piece of material. Right, so there's all these things around that I came to right away, and with Cantor it was much more like, whoa.
Yeah.
And in fact, I didn't find, to be honest with you, pleasure in it until the piece arrived. And now, like with almost all pieces we make, I eventually love them all, but it was I was much more aloof about this.
Yeah. There wasn't any aesthetic connection in terms of the work of these directors.
Not at all, actually. It's interesting.
Because you could say you're now an expert on Polish theater directors.
I definitely know more than I did before. Yeah, we definitely, I mean, that's definitely something too to like recommend, is like as deep a dive as you can take in material. You're always going to be a dilettante, right? We don't pretend that we're perfecting anything. In fact, that's a good thing to keep in mind, that there's always going to be a gap between you and the thing that you're trying to approach. But that gap is what is fascinating.
And you're advocating for deep dramaturgy with any theatrical creation. That's part of the work.
Yeah.
Right? You got to do the work of research.
And then you will transform.
Yeah.
But one thing to say about Poor Theater also, so there's the Forsyth and there's the Poor Theater, and then the piece in the middle, the often forgotten piece, is a piece about Max Ernst doing these rubbings.
Forgotten that, yeah.
It is Ernst, isn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think it's Ernst, doing the rubbings on, it's so long ago now. That, you know, Liz was fascinated by the parquet on the floor at the theater in Wrocław, where Grotowski made his work. And she was obsessed with the parquet, and it sort of faded into this little piece in the middle about Ernst being obsessed with the wood floor in the place that there's this writing, this thing he wrote about being obsessed with the wood floor, and then taking a piece of paper and putting on top of it and starting these pencil rubbings. And he would make these new things out of the rubbings that was neither the floor nor the paper, it was this new thing. And it was Liz's way, I think, of summarizing her approach to that piece, and also her work, I feel like, in the last 20 years in general, to some extent. This idea of like laying us as the paper onto this material that she somehow becomes obsessed by, or starts out obsessed by, or is being paid to
be obsessed by.
and you know, rubbing, and then out of that is this new thing.
Yeah.
So.
And I guess we do have time for one more question, yes? Which is going to be just a big question, so if you don't want to answer this or don't know how, that's fine. I'm just going to say that in these political times that we're facing, I want to know how it is to be an artist. Clearly, I would think of the Wooster group as being a formalist group, and that you don't always directly engage with the larger culture in the moment in which the piece is being produced, but I think in some ways it's subtly there, in ways that are not overt but are present. And I will say that the Wooster Group has also had, because of their history and their longevity, a measure of support and freedom that a lot of other artistic groups don't have. So what do you see as your role or your responsibility right now as artists in this particular cultural moment? And if that's too vague to answer, you can just throw up your hands and we can call cut.
Well, to be honest with you, the arts funding environment, as everyone knows, is not so great right now. And we own our theater, so a lot of people think, oh, they're fine, they have 40 years of institutional support and they own their theater and it'll just keep on going forever. But it's becoming increasingly hard for the company to stay together and to keep the theater alive.
Yeah.
So for us immediately, because we're the company and Liz and Kate Falk and Cynthia, our producer, we're also concerned with keeping the Performing Garage a space for artists. To me, that's our chief responsibility right now, is to keep it possible for people to come use a space for free, or to have a long process, or to not have to make work on a shoestring for 2 weeks time, you know. So that's maybe not a direct political engagement, but I think as artists that the group is, that's the concern right now.
And I just say that's a different model that I think in this country is rare to see, whereas in other places in the world where there is more state-funded support for the arts, you see those models more clearly. So I think it's important to see this in the United States as well.
And it's shrinking. I mean, there used to be more theater companies in New York. Even 10 years ago, there were more theater companies operating in New York, and not all of those theater companies had spaces, of course, but Helen Shaw wrote a great piece, I think it was in Vulture, where she outlines, the kind of demise of the theater company model because of the way funding is, and I think that's really sad.
And sort of hand in hand in that too is because of funding that we used to have that maybe we don't have anymore, is there seems to be it's a slightly more, I don't even know slightly, but there's a more conservative attitude towards work and funding work. Oddly conservative, to the extent that seems to be, it's very difficult to make work that challenges our notions of certain ideas, because it's almost like a fear of offending that we all struggle with.
Yeah.
And it's odd sometimes, it feels like the broader fight politically that it seems like we all should be engaging in is being undermined sometimes by a fight to control artistic expression in a way, for fear of offending, or for, and one of the things that makes, I think, that is so precious about Elizabeth LeCompte as a resource and the Wooster Group as a resource and certain artists as a resource is their fearlessness in exploring and addressing and putting two things next to each other without so that we can examine our own relationship to certain maybe potentially sensitive ideas. And that, I think, is sort of wrapped up also in the institutional funding thing, where it's scary to think that in these times in particular, that we're actually feeling less free to explore things that might be provocative.
Yeah, there's, I think of it as there's a lack of freedom to fail. And that's partly to do with the economy and the arts funding environment. Is you just have to, you have to have your thing be a success. Right. It has to be, it has to resonate with the moment in a certain way. And in my view, the role of artists is to have some room to explore and muck around, and
for sure.
and fail.
For sure, and from what I know about like Tuscany and Cantor, they also felt that same way, right? That art has to be
Right.
the realm of potential failure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have that be stimulating and a good positive thing,
Mm-hmm.
not a fear that stands over you and makes you do less.
Yeah.
So just to say the bigger political thing is something that I think has more to do, that we address more when we do this.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that like everyone in the room has a different political understanding of their place in the world or what's happening in the world, we are all present in the space making work, and so it's like
Yeah.
I feel like the politics gets infused in a much more ambient way.
Yeah,
Do you know what I
that sounds
mean?
right. Yeah.
That there's no, it's very rarely that we're talking about it as vis-a-vis the work. That it's
Yes.
more about we are political and we make work, so therefore it's
There's
inescapable.
there's something in the DNA
Yeah.
that maybe
Yes.
not so evident on the surface.
Yes. Well, I think we're going to end on this not so happy note. Unless there's anything else you folks want to add. Okay, well then we'll just say thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's lovely
Thank you
to
very
chat
much.
with you.
This was
It's nice
nice.
to meet you both.
Thank you.
And good luck on your next production.
Thank you.
Hopefully you'll bring it back to this country at some point in the future we can see it.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.